new world currency.
The New World Order.
Those are the roots of trouble.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from FederalJack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. Tonight's edition is a special one indeed. I have the pleasure of interviewing a legend, I would say. You've all heard me talk about her on air plenty of times, play audio clips, and quote things she said and read things out of her book. But tonight, you actually get to hear her speak. So without wasting any more time, I want to bring to the air, and for your listening pleasure and your education, Charlotte Thompson Iserby. Charlotte, welcome to my show.
Oh, hi there, Popeye. First of all, I just want to say I love your name, Popeye. It relaxes me. It makes me think of a time when there was sanity abroad, and I mean abroad, all around us in that way. I'm looking forward to this interview, and hopefully I'll be able to explain some of the very extreme, unbelievable, pathetic things that are going on in our country right now, and how they've been going on for a long time without many people knowing. There is something I would like to say before we start in how it all happened. There's a very important article, I think, that I wrote. I keep being surprised when I see how long ago it was that I wrote some of these articles, but I think about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, I wrote an article called The Devil's Seven-Pronged Fork, and I want to explain how that article happened. It was after the umpteenth radio interview that I had done over a period of 25 years probably, where I was trying to help people understand that nothing happening in our country was by mistake. Important stuff, right? That everything had been planned. And of course, that's key thing for those who are implementing this system. They have to brainwash, using the media, etc., the whole country with the fact that when anybody tells them that something has been planned, they're a kook. We're conspiracy freaks, and Americans have fallen for that. I mean, if you give them good history that proves that their congressman or the president or our president 30 years ago or whatever did not have the best interests of Americans at heart, if you give them that history, they will call you a kook. They will say, oh, you're one of those conspiracy freaks. So anyway, I had finished with an interview, and I had been sort of beating up on the audience because nobody seemed to really be taking action to stop what was happening to our great country, certainly in the schools. I mean, how much money we spend, billions and billions of dollars on educating our children, and every year the test scores go down. That's enough for, a third grader in 1950 would be able to tell you that something is radically wrong. But Americans just don't look at things that way anymore. 2 + 2 is 4. No, they think it's 5. So anyway, I was beating up on them and saying, get with it, please, etc. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, like I'm a great believer in God Almighty, as you go through life and get older and all, and you see what I've seen all around the world, because I was in the Foreign Service as well, you realize that there is nothing other than God Almighty. That's the end of all of our results should be geared towards that. And everything that happens in life, we are there to help the good Lord keep this magnificent system that we have and country intact with its beliefs. I don't care what religion you are, basically, but with the belief that man himself cannot solve all these problems. So anyway, this message came from God, and I'm not kidding. I don't really know that I've ever really had a message from God other than this one. And basically, it's funny. It's not like someone's giving you a message. It's simply that all of a sudden, I had this thought that came to my mind. It's not their fault, which meant it's not the audience's fault. Then bang, 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 bang. I could, I kept identifying different reasons why Americans look at you with that blank stare, and they don't know what to do. They don't understand. They become befuddled. And when I say it is not their fault, but that doesn't mean that lets them off the hook. But they have to understand that what has happened over the past 200 years, I'd say, 150 certainly in the United States, has been carefully planned. And it is a diabolical agenda. And the reason I say that is that only the devil, only Satan, could put together such an exquisite agenda. Not Einstein, nobody I've ever heard of who's brilliant, no nuclear physicist, whoever could come up with this plan. And what it is this. I'm going to try. I never keep them in order, but number one, gradualism. I suppose that's the most lethal one of all. Because if you have a plan to take a country or to destroy whatever you want to destroy, you're not going to do it right up front. You're not going to tell people. I mean, obviously, your listeners understand this. Say, way back 100 years ago, a decision was made by the elite industrialists in the early 1900s to say a decision was made to change America from a free market system to a planned economy. Now, if you were one of those elitists, you surely would know that you're not going to be able to get Congress to pass that right off the bat. You're not going to introduce a bill in October or something and expect to have it go through the process and be passed by the U.S. Congress. So you have to do it gradually. So that's gradualism. The frog, you put him in the cold water, you heat it up gradually, and after 100 years, the frog is toasted. Right now, boiled. We are boiled right now. But we still have a little, we're on borrowed time. So that's gradualism. Then you have the use of words that mean one thing to us, like basic education or decision-making, one thing to a parent, and a totally different thing to a change agent educator. For instance, we think basics is learning reading, writing, and arithmetic. They'll tell you they're going to go back to basics. They do that every 15 years. We have some sort of a new agenda, new reform movement, whatever, to spend more money, to move forward to the next agenda, which moves them closer and closer to what I was talking about in the beginning, changing America's economic system to a planned economy. So you have the semantic deception basics is that the children understand that the United States Constitution is outmoded, that we should have a free market system. It doesn't work that well anymore. We need to have partnerships with the public sector, things like that. That's basics to them. Global education is basic to them. Parents don't know that. Forget the reading and writing and math skills and social studies and Shakespeare. All right, so we've gone through the first is the gradualism. Then we have a semantic deception where they use these terms that you think, as a good parent, mean one thing. To them, it's totally different. Folks, you got to realize that I was a school board member at the local level, and I was trained as a change agent, and I will tell you about that after. I was trained to identify the resistors in my community. Those are the good people out there who happen to ask questions about these terms. They say, hey, wait a minute, what do you mean by basics, Mr. Change Agent? Those are resistors. They have to be dealt with. Okay. And I was trained, a retired school teacher paid for me to go for training in being a change agent in the mid-'70s, and that blew my mind. Anyway, so we've gotten through the semantics and gradualism. Then you have the dialectic. This is terribly important. If you want to bring about a major change, which you know the people are not going to accept if you told them outright, like we want to get rid of your elected officials. We don't want to have elected officials. That's basically what they're trying to do right now. They're trying to do it through charter schools, which don't have elected officials on the boards. But they're not going to tell you up front that they want to get rid of elected officials. So what they do is they create a problem in order to get to be able to enforce a solution. So they make the deliberate dumbing down is so effective that everything is falling apart. The kids can't read, write, or anything. And then the parents start screaming and yelling for good reason. So what can they do then? The time has come when we can make a recommendation to have a different form of school, a charter school, which will allow the parents to be able to opt out of the public school system and be able to choose what kind of a school they want to go to that they think is the best in the community. Usually it's run by some corporation because the goal of charter schools is nothing other than training for the workforce like they do in Cuba and Russia and everywhere else. It's a totalitarian system. But anyway, they get the parents to fall for it. And at the same time the parents are falling for this, the parents are losing their elected officials because charter schools do not have elected school boards. So in other words, you can't get rid of, you don't have anybody that you can get rid of because they have appointed boards. You can't recall somebody who's been appointed.
So these charter schools are like a big Venus flytrap.
Oh, yes, it's a real Trojan horse. So there we have the dialectic. So we've gone through gradualism, semantics, and the dialectic. They are really very, very key, those first three. Then you have big bucks, endless amounts of money because of the Federal Reserve. There's always enough money for education. It's interesting, isn't it? Always enough money to pour down that rat hole. And if you don't think it's a rat hole, you've got to ask yourself, how many times do you go back to a butcher who initially had good meat? And then you go the second time, and the hamburger's not so good, but you like him so well. He's such a good friend. You play ball with him and all. And then the third time, it's really bad again. Now, are you going to continue going to that butcher? No. The American people keep going back. They keep going back. It's almost like they're masochistic. I don't know whether they have a guilt complex or something, and they feel that not putting that money in, even though it's a rat hole, and it's dumbing down and wrecking the values of their children, they have this feeling that if they don't vote for the school budget, they're going to be hurting children. I have not been able to figure it out myself, because I figured it out a long time ago, that more money has nothing to do with good education. In fact, it causes declining test scores, because then they have the opportunity to have all of these programs that are designed to destroy your children's morals and values, like sex ed, drug ed, bullying ed, death ed, and keep naming it. And I know all of them. You'll never believe me, but I have it in my book. I have the documentation. Those programs are geared, they've admitted it themselves, to do just the opposite of what they tell the parents. because they've got to have a breakdown in morality in this country. They were very clever. This is why I call the devil's seven-pronged fork. This is exquisite, what they've done. So then you have all the money in the world. Then you have, very, very important, the right and the left, the Republicans and the Democrats, are the same at the top. Now, they may not be down in your community at the local level where you have some real differences, right? But at the top, they have the identical agenda, which is a United Nations totalitarian world government. UN was communist, set up by communists. 80% of the founders of the UN were communists. Alger Hiss, who headed it up, was a communist. All the wars that we have fought since World War II were run by a communist general out of the United Nations. He directed our military. This is unbelievable. Who, in the case of General MacArthur, he didn't like those directions, so he went against that communist general, and he was fired. So we've lost hundreds of thousands of our young people, your grandparents and parents perhaps, in Korea and Vietnam due to the UN being run by communists. Now, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, I think there were 21 or so advisors in different groups of education. Every single one was a Eastern European or Russian communist. And that is where our curriculum comes from, UNESCO, the United Nations. Now, ask yourself, why? Couldn't there have been, someone from Australia or the United States or maybe Belgium or Japan? How come every single one came from Russia and Eastern Europe? I have all the documents here on these things. So these are the people that have been behind the scenes with plenty of money and brainwashing our children. And these people, they hold the strings that the Republicans and the Democrats at the top support. They support this. They support this international agenda. Now, before I'll go on a little bit and point out the media control, total media control. David Rockefeller, in a speech about 8 years ago in Baden-Baden, Germany, closed to the public, spoke to the press, the big guys, right? Washington Post, New York Times, CBS, etc., Ted Turner. And he thanked them for keeping these these socialist world government plans under wraps, these corporate fascist socialist world government plans under wraps. He thanked them for that. So that's the media, the total media control. There may be some other things that I have forgotten there, but this is extremely important, this article. It's called The Devil's Seven-Pronged Fork. And when you look at all of these bullets of what they did to accomplish their objectives, which are being carried out right now. I mean, take a look. When you have the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, under President Obama is no worse than any of the others. I'd like to make a point there. He's just sitting he's the one who's going to get all the blame. Because nobody knows that this plan has been in effect since 1934 at least. So you have Arne Duncan, who was in Chicago, the schools there, and he called for paying students for good grades. So he's a great follower of B.F. Skinner and Pavlov, which means you never do anything unless you get a reward. It's stimulus response. It doesn't require any brain or soul or free will. That's a subject that is very much dealt with in my big book and in the little one, the abridged version as well. Operant conditioning, which is being used not just in the schools but on all of us now, that we have the community-oriented policing system. In my town, where they give medals to citizens who do good deeds, the police, they give medals to citizens who do good deeds, and the police decide what the good deed is, defines a good deed. Our country, nobody's going to speak out about anything anymore, and you notice this. Politically correct, has to be politically correct, everything, but people are unwilling to speak out now for fear they will be punished. And if they take a position or join an unelected council or something, they do it because they're going to be rewarded. And that's Skinner. That's reward and punishment. I'm going to go back. This plan has been carefully put into place. It started in 1934. And probably the most important document that I ever got my hands on, although I have many, many wonderful documents, and most of them are available at my son's website, which is called AmericanDeception.com. And these are not copied these are hand-scanned documents, original documents going back 200 years. And there are 139,000 pages at that website of material that the people, the insiders have been talking about today, wish you would never see. One of them is very important. It's 3,000 pages, and it was the only copy available in the United States, and I bought it from a very good friend of mine who worked in Congress and who had the only copy existing, because it's the transcript of the congressional hearing into the tax-exempt foundations, investigation of the tax-exempt foundations like Ford, Rockefeller, Carnegie, etc., and how they were spending their money. It was in 1953, and Congress was very concerned that the tax-exempt foundations, that's your money, folks, was being spent to bring about a communist socialist America. So the hearings were abruptly shut down in 1954. That was when President Eisenhower was in office. And the Republicans and the Democrats both wanted those hearings shut down. And so the foundations, because too much information had come out already in the investigation, they went around the country and bought up all the copies of because every library, most libraries are supposed to have the records of all congressional hearings. And they bought them all up so the American people wouldn't know what had happened. But there was one copy left, and I bought it, and my son has put it up on the Internet. That investigation was very important because you've heard me talking about communism and how we're moving towards a corporate, fascist, socialist, communist system. Totalitarian, lifelong, your children will not have any upward mobility because they're going to be identified early on, just like in Cuba or Russia or China, what job they're going to do. And that's why you see them getting rid of grades in the schools now, individual education plans, no competition, that's communism. They're not going to be deciding what their livelihoods will be. They will be decided by the corporation in partnership with the public school system, or really the charter schools. That's why they need the charter schools that don't have elected school boards, because they can get away with this training rather than educating your children for upward mobility and understanding the world around them and all that. So this is the plan. Now, this plan, I'm going back to the 1934 document that I have. The Carnegie Corporation actually started this whole move towards a planned economy. And I'm going to take you through just a little bit of chronological history here. There's a little book. It's on my son's website at AmericanDeception.com, and it's published by Carnegie Corporation, and the title is Conclusions and Recommendations for the Social Studies. Carnegie commissioned quite a few educators to get together and draw up the plan for America. And in that little book, it calls for using the schools to change America to a planned economy. It's a fascinating book because it looks forward to resistance on the part of Americans to these changes and loss of freedoms and all. And then, of course, many people, maybe even in your audience, are saying, "Oh, well, she's talking about 1934, and she's elderly, and she doesn't understand really that, that was 1934. This is 2012." And I say, well, wait a minute, no. There was never any deviation. And not just Carnegie, but Rockefeller, Ford, et cetera. And now we've got Gates Foundation, Walmart, all of them jumping on board to implement it. The Chamber of Commerce has always been deeply involved. They were deeply involved in the passage of the original going into the United Nations, the Chamber of Commerce. Deeply involved in school choice, too. This is a side comment for me. Deeply involved, always wanted vouchers. That's because they know it's necessary for school choice, for vouchers necessary for school to work, the Soviet Polytech training system. These people have been planning this for years. So we'll go back to Carnegieville a bit, and then Carnegie moves on and does the first experiment, interestingly enough, in the 1930s for 8 years, does an 8-year study in which they remove all the grades and testing and everything else, and no K through 12 and individual education plans like they're putting in now across the country. They did this for 8 years. It was a pilot for outcomes-based education, which some of you may remember. We fought it so hard in the 90s, and it's still there, and that's what's being put in right now because that goes with a computer. But anyway, so Carnegie was involved in the 30s with the outcome-based education plan. Then it moved on to be deeply involved. Alger Hiss was Carnegie Corporation, getting into the UN, UNESCO. Carnegie gave the money for the first regional group that affected all of our states with education policy. They funded and set up the Education Commission of the States in Denver, Colorado. And out of the Education Commission of the States, all the legislation went into every state, and every state had, I think, a couple of legislators from their legislature belonging to this group in Denver. So we all ended up having the same curriculum. That's how the curriculum became really nationalized. So, but then I'm going to go to 1945, the UN, then Carnegie, let's see what we go to 1965, with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Carnegie was deeply involved in the implementation and recommendation for individually prescribed instruction, which is what's going in right now. This is the Skinner method, where no thinking goes on. It's sort of, let me explain this because a lot of people don't understand it. When you go to the doctor, or used to sort of remember, he'd take a little hammer with a rubber on the end, and he'd hit your knee, and it would pop up. Well, that's what you call stimulus response. That's all they care about now. They don't care about your child thinking, imagining, creating, being an individual. They're educating for the collective. They're educating for robots. So all education will be geared towards what I was talking about before: stimulus, response, rewards, conditioning. And this will be and this is perfect for the computer because the software can be developed to bring about changes in any attitude or value that your child has through this Socratic questioning and the use of the computer. And this has been proven, and the head of the World Institute for Computer-Assisted Teaching, Dustin Houston, said about 20 years ago, that won't it be wonderful when the child in the most distant county or town can have the equivalent of knowledge of the world's greatest psychologists on that computer. And nobody, that's you parents, it's really almost teachers too, can get between you and the computer. That's what's being put in now, no books, etc. So then we move on.
You're the one that called that all those years ago and said they were going to change the school books and get rid of them and use computers. And a lot of people were like, yeah. And now look what they're doing. They're doing exactly that. They're giving these kids these iPads and these tablets, and they're doing away with books completely.
That's right. And I want to point out, I don't like to do this, but I wrote about this in 1985 in a little book called Back to Basics, or Skinnerian International Curriculum, which actually had all the proof which came out of my office, because I was relieved of my duties for leaking a technology grant. And I wrote this little book, and I explained to the American people what was going to happen and how the goal was nothing but values destruction and educating for world government and using the computer. And all the documentation was in this little 39-page book. And there wasn't a single conservative organization. They all boycotted that book. I want to tell you this because folks have got to wake up and realize that the very people that you and I have to admit, I was taken to the cleaners too. It took me a long time to find out, especially since 1980 with Ronald Reagan and the neoconservatives who are really Trotskyites. When they took over the conservative movement, I was right there, and I was watching that. And I saw it, and I kept shaking my head. I thought, what are they doing putting in this computerized stuff? Why are they adopting Skinner to teach reading, direct instruction, it's called? What is going on? And I just really was amazed, and I got the document. I leaked the document, but before I leaked that big computer grant, I got all the other documents out. So, because I knew I was going to get fired. I basically fired myself. So I did get fired, and then I wrote the president after I was fired, and I told him what was going on in my office because it was the most important office in the world that I was working in, and for education. And I happened to be, not because I had any credentials whatsoever, but I happened to be sitting in an office that belonged to, it would have been the former president of Columbia University. These were the big hotshot internationalist change agents, real communists, who were dedicated to changing our wonderful form of government and our system of education. And I saw all their documents. I saw old documents, all the future documents for right now, and I knew what was going on. And so I wrote the president, and I didn't get it. I never got an answer from him, but I know he got my letter because the journalist, John Lofton, called his office one day. I was with him, and his secretary, the Reagan secretary, said, "Oh yes, he's got her letter right here. He's written all over the margins." And he sent it on to Ed Meese. And I never got a response. I never got a response, not from Meese either. I went down to Washington on my own money to see Ed Meese, and a fellow in his office who was very high up at the time, Ken Cribb. These names mean nothing to your people, but I have to keep saying them because someday I'm going to go to the Reagan Library and find that letter. Ken Cribb patted me on the shoulder and said, "Oh, Charlotte, aren't you glad the president got your letter?" And I said, "Not really." I said, "I want a response. I don't even care what the president has to say to me. I just want him to acknowledge the fact that he got my letter, so I can tell people that President Reagan knows exactly what's going on." So anyway, getting back to exactly what's going on, this is connected. Ronald Reagan signed agreements in 1985 with the Soviet Union, merging the two education systems. That blew a lot of our minds, but of course the media wouldn't touch that. The conservatives wouldn't touch that either. At the same time, Carnegie Corporation signed agreements. They're never to be outdone, I'll tell you, Carnegie. They signed agreements with the Soviet Academy of Science in regard to the development of computer courseware in critical thinking for early elementary school children. Now, how do you like that? Doesn't it make you feel good that your child may have some good communist critical thinking computer courseware in first grade? Huh? Yeah, that's nice, isn't it? So anyway, all of this makes a lot of sense because in 1953, when we were talking about the investigation of the foundations, Norman Dodd, who was the director of the research committee, I knew him, and wonderful man, he was called up to New York City to the Ford Foundation. It was as part of the investigation. And he had to go up there to talk to the president of the Ford Foundation in regard to the Ford Foundation's monies, spending of money to, promote communism all over the world, really. And the president of the Ford Foundation, Rowan Gaither, said to him, Mr. Dodd, he said, we do not set our own agenda on how to spend our money. We get our instructions from the White House. And the instructions are to spend our money to change America, through the schools too, boy, big time, mainly through the schools, so that it can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. Now, that particular episode or conversation is not in the congressional record because Rowan Gaither requested that that meeting be off the record. So Norman Dodd was pretty fair about that one. But I know that that's true. I mean, I sat down and talked to him about this over dinner in Georgetown in 1981. And then in 1985, when Reagan signed the agreements, Norman Dodd was just devastated. You know, of course, he said, this is it. This is it. And then, of course, they had to pretend the Soviet Union had collapsed, you know, in 1990. Gorbachev, who's the biggest communist that ever lived and never changed, and he admits it, right? He calls the European Union the new European Soviet, which should tell us something if we're going to have a North American Union. We'll have a North American Soviet. But anyway, so the wall, they said that communism was dead. No, they had to pretend. It's totally, I mean, communism is more alive in Russia and everywhere. Maybe not so much in Eastern Europe, thank God, but it has jumped the ocean. It's totally alive here. You can tick off the Communist Manifesto. I'm not going to go through it. Someday you can, Popeye, for your listeners, or they can just go on the internet. Just take it yourself and check off what's happened. We've lost everything. I mean, I don't think there's much left except the inheritance tax, which surely they will be taking from us soon. Sustainable development is just the latest label for regionalism. Regional government has been going on ever since the 40s. We never paid any attention to it when they were putting it into our states. It was very smoothly done, where you merge state lines, services. The police will be merged in your town with another police force, and they'll tell you that that's to save money and make more efficiency in all of this. Well, regional government calls for the council form of government, which means unelected councils, just like the charter schools that I'm talking about earlier. No elected officials under regional government. And regional government, this will come as a shock to some of your listeners, I'm sure, is communism. And you should tell your town council about this and tell them to do a little research because they've fallen for regionalism. I have an article from a sociology professor, University of California, written about 30 years ago. He's still alive. His name is Morris Zeitlin. And he wrote an article that was in the Communist Daily World in 1975, I believe. And in that article, he in effect said that regionalism is communism, because he's talking about how the United States is moving so slowly towards regionalism, and what a shame it is, and we should move faster. And he says, because it works so well in the Soviet Union. So anyway, regionalism is communism. Sustainable development is communism, which is what they're pushing in, you know, UN Rio, UN Agenda 21, taking our land away from us, all these environmental protections. They tell us that what they're doing is related to the environment when it actually pertains to total control of you lifelong in every area of your life. So we got to, I was talking about Carnegie, and then we're going to move on. So Carnegie signed agreements, as well as Reagan, to merge the two systems and to use the Soviet critical thinking curriculum with elementary school children. Then we got to the 90s and all. You've got all the Republicans in there, Bush and Lamar Alexander and Chester Finn and this William Bennett and all these neoconservatives who are really Trotskyites. I mean, how else? It makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, they did more damage when they had their nation at risk. That started in my office. That was another agenda to move us forward to the planned economy recommended in 1934 by Carnegie. The merger with the Soviet Union has a planned economy. You keep moving forward, and now they're putting the planned economy into the United States with the corporations in partnership with the public sector government. Reagan, when I was in the 1980s, I was the liaison with the White House on the President's Private Sector Initiative, it was called. And I went over, because they made me liaison from my office in the Department of Ed. I went over and I listened to what they were talking about, and I got up and I said, what are we doing? I said, when you merge the public and private sector, isn't this corporate fascism? You don't have any accountability any longer to the taxpayers. And they said, oh, I don't know that anybody looked at it. Well, they did darn well. They knew exactly what they were doing, because shortly after that, there was an article in the Washington Post. It talked about the task force that was set up by Reagan people, Ed Meese and Weinberger, et cetera, and it was to change, and here we go, America's free market system to a planned economy. They didn't call it that. They said public-private partnerships, like in Japan. That's in a Washington Post article. So it was under Reagan that our economic system was changed to conform with what Carnegie called for in 1934. And then we move on, and they're looking at the situation, and they're saying, well, how are we going to train the children for the workforce? Your children, okay? Well, we're going to have a different form of school. Of course, they knew all along that's what they were looking for, so that's why they dumbed down the whole system to such an extent that we would accept it. We're going to have to do away with the hierarchical structure of the American public school system, K through 12, elementary, middle, high school, 3 principals, superintendent, elected school board. I know all this because I was an elected board member. And it's a beautiful system. And they had to get rid of it, but they knew very well that they're not going to, even now with the dumbed-down population and dumbed-down school boards, I doubt that if you left it up to the majority of school boards that they would vote to change education from academics to training for the workforce. So you've got to get rid of those nasty elected officials. You've got to get rid of them. Charter schools will do what we want. Most of the charter schools are headed up by corporations. They're using the Skinner method, the direct instruction, because they know it's essential for the computer. Nothing else will work on the computer except the Skinner method. He said, computer's my box. All right, so we're moving on. That's what's going in now. And then, of course, as I said, the workforce training has all been set up. It's very sophisticated how, with the computer and everything, how they're going to identify what your child is going to be in the future. They're going to design your child's education plan according to what they have decided his future is going to be. I mean, if they think he's not, and this is terrible at an early age because some children don't, especially boys, don't blossom until much later. And they say, well, he's not all that smart with figures or something, so maybe he certainly can't be a rocket scientist, so maybe he could be working as a janitor in a school or something, or which nothing wrong with that, but it's not correct for the government and the corporations to be deciding who's going to be doing what and designing the curriculum for them. So anyway, that is exactly what we're looking at now, and every single step of it has been made. I mean, my following it has been really, I can't say it's been an easy road because it's been devastatingly depressing, but Carnegie Corporation made it quite easy for me. I mean, you could just follow them. I always say it's sort of like, Hansel and Gretel, when they went to Grandma or whatever, and they were afraid they couldn't find their way back, so they dropped the little pieces of bread along the way. Well, Carnegie you just follow Carnegie, and that's all you have to do. And for people who want to get started on it, they just go to my son's website, go to my book, too, which talks about it as well, but you're not going to see the actual book, which is scanned, and type in the search engine conclusions. And then everything else that I've talked about is in my book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. The updated version is a really very user-friendly book. We did take out some of the appendices, the glossary, et cetera, in the great big book, because the big book was the size of a telephone book, right? And we wanted something that the American people could you take with them. You can put it in your briefcase, you can even put it in your pocketbook. So we took some parts of it out, but what you can do is, if you get the updated, abridged version that came out in last December, you can get it at Amazon.com, and when you get it, you're going to see in the beginning there's a wonderful update that really does encompass what I've told you today. It really does. It brings you right down to the Gates Foundation, the sustainable development, the assessments, the Skinner method. Everything is in there that has happened in the update from the year 2000 to the year 2012. We wanted to bring people up to date to see that the history that we'd provided over a couple hundred years, the final implementation of that agenda is being implemented now, being put in. International Baccalaureate is something to watch out for. Very, very scary. Marxist curriculum, totally. Stay away from it. If your school superintendent tells you, we've got this one, it sounds good, doesn't it? International Baccalaureate. It sounds very elitist. You want your child to get into it. No, you don't. Check it out, huh? But this kind of thing is what we've discussed in the update. And I hope all of you will take advantage of this book. And when you see 3 little D's, lowercase, in bold print, that means something was taken from the original book. Something's been omitted there for brevity purposes, right? You can go on the Internet to the big book, Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Go to deliberatedumbingdown.com. It's a free download. Download it. Start downloading it before you go to bed. Next morning, you've got it on your computer. And when you run into those 3 little D's, that means something's been taken out. You can immediately go into the book on your screen and identify what was taken out and read it on the computer. So I urge you, evidently it's not too late to make changes, or I wouldn't be talking to you, or I wouldn't have wonderful people like Popeye who invite me to talk to you. I think it is very late, and I think that for the best thing for you to do is to absorb the fact that we have the left, Arne Duncan, and on the right, Ed Feulner at Heritage, with all of the conservative organizations out there supporting school choice and charter schools. And then we also have, and guess what? The third entity that is supporting school choice and charter schools, the Council on Foreign Relations. There should no longer be a question in people's minds about those few researchers of us, old-line conservatives, who have been trying to tell the American people that there isn't any difference between the left and the right at the top. They've admitted it now, haven't they? I mean, when you have the left-wing Arne Duncan, who calls for paying students for good grades, because that's what they're going to be doing on the computer, you have him. Now, aren't you surprised to hear that the Heritage Foundation, which is considered to be this major conservative organization that's going to save us, save our freedoms, they're on the right. They want the same school choice that the left wants. And then, to give its stamp of approval, bing, boom, the Council on Foreign Relations, people like Kissinger and you name it, most of our senators and these people that have sold us down the river, they approve of it too. So there's one group left. That's you, okay? Now you're saying, now what's she going to tell us we can do? You cannot win a war, and I'll tell you this is a big war, and we've been in it longer than any other war. You could combine all the wars together. It's never been this long. We have been at war ever since the beginning of the last century. And that little book, Conclusions and Recommendations for the Social Studies, is the proof. They haven't let up one single bit. And you've got to understand that. And you've got to inform your friends and your homeschool, moms and all, and dads. And somehow, homeschool, don't take a computer. Don't fall for computers in your home school or charter school computers, virtual academies. Let me explain why. Because the minute the money is there from the federal government, there's no school choice that is going to be safe for you except if you never accept a penny from the federal state or local taxes. You cannot accept services. You cannot accept computers. You can't accept anything. Now, homeschoolers are falling for school choice, charter schools. They're falling for Secretary Bennett's program. He has a virtual charter school. And they're smart, though, homeschoolers. They asked him and said, Secretary Bennett, what test are you going to administer with your charter school on the computer? And he said, well, the federal test. He said, I have to. That's the national assessment because my charter school is federally funded. And so the homeschoolers said, oh, well, we're not going to go that way. I hope you understand, listeners out there. So the only solution is a very difficult solution, but I think that our country has run up against a lot more difficult things, really serious things in its history, and somehow it's managed to survive because we've had the courage and persistence, and we've given up a lot in order to preserve our freedoms, including people dying in wars. So what has to happen is Americans have to homeschool. I know that there are parents out there saying, well, we can't because we both work. All right? If it's absolutely essential that both of you work, there must be somebody in your community, on your block, in your neighborhood, who is not working, who could get an excellent homeschool curriculum and start a homeschool group of 15 or 20 children. I hope you understand what I'm saying. This is the only way you can go. If you go the other way, it'll be the end of private education, and they know that. You see, this is how to kill private education. If you allow the government to fund private education, be it homeschool, religious school, private school, you kill private education because they've taken the money and they have to conform to all of the regulations, stipulations, and testing, whatever, of the federal government. And that is in the law for babysitting, whatever you call that. Remember way back when people who would start little groups at home and they'd babysitting and things like that. I can't remember the word right now, but there was a law, this legislation passed for this. Daycare. Sorry, folks. My mind went blank for a minute. Daycare. The daycare regulations, in the congressional regulations, are that any daycare, this is back 30 years ago, and this would apply to all schools. If the provider of daycare does anything that is not conforming with the regulations, they will shut them down. There's no more funding. So the goal here of what we're looking at is to create a planned economy with a planned workforce, a certain number of this, certain number of that, people who understand communist education, like Professor Eugene Boyce from Georgia, good quote of his, he says, in communist countries, they do not educate for jobs that don't exist. Think about it. That means if your child, would like to be whatever, maybe something really out of bounds, maybe he's an entrepreneur, or say he wants to be a cellist. Well, they've got enough cellists, so he's not going to have any education, or whatever job you can think of. A cook, say he wants to be a chef. Well, they've got enough chefs in your area, wherever you live. So he's not going to be able to get training. The great English novelist, writer, C.S. Lewis, he really explained it. It takes me sometimes at least an hour to get through to people on this subject. It takes him one sentence. And he said, when training for the workforce beats education, which is what we used to have. We had the finest system in the world, right? They finally got us. But he said, when training for the workforce beats education, civilization dies.
Well said, Charlotte. Thank you for covering pretty much every aspect of it and being able to put it into a condensed version of it. I do urge the listeners to get a physical copy of your book while they can, because there could be an EMP blast or a solar flare, or the electrical grid could just go out, and you'd still be able to read your book and get information via candlelight if you had to. And I'm a book collector myself, so I have a physical copy of it. Do you still have the few hardcover editions that you had left for sale?
Yes, I do. I have a few left, and it's a pretty good deal. I'm selling it for much less than, the out-of-print version. I'm selling it for less than anybody else on the Internet, but I'm selling that. I have a few left of the Big Baby that I sign for people, and then I also give them free the new version. So they get that, and I pay for the shipping, and it's $160 the packet. Both books and the shipping is included, and I sign a copy for people who might be interested in having a copy of the out-of-print version, and there really aren't. There are very, very few left, and I'm interested. A lot of people have been interested in that little deal, because most on the Internet are asking at least $160 for one used copy. And mine is brand new and signed, and I include the new version of the book as well, and the shipping's in there. So they can contact me by going to my website, deliberatedumbingdown.com. If they want the out-of-print version, which is a beauty, and which also includes, that deal includes the new version. If they want that, they can get all the information off of my website. They can email me, too. My email is dumbdown, DUMBDOWN 00 @ yahoo.com, and they can order it that way from me if they wish. Also, I urge them to. There are a lot of my articles are on the web. At my website, deliberatedumbingdown.com, just click on articles, and there's a lot there that I've written which really brings you up to speed on not just education, but the first article I mentioned, which really is my favorite because it's the Devil's Seven-Pronged Fork, for you to understand how you and your community and everybody, your churches, that's another subject, right, how you've all been had. And it is tragic how the Christian churches have been part of this whole plan, and many of them are falling for it now through Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Church and Peter Drucker, the German economist and the guy who believes in all these systems management, which is all part of what we're looking at today. Because the computer, everything is systems. There will be nothing about you, your personal life, your family, your plans, what you think, dream, whatever. It's going to be on the computer and all used for their, in quotes, purposes. It's like a chain, a global system chain, and the links are not allowed to be broken. And so that's what we're moving into. But it's important if you wonder why many Christian churches just seem not to be doing anything about this, it's because either they don't know they're part of the system, they don't understand it. The purpose-driven, see? Just look at that. Purpose-driven. You know what that is? That's B.F. Skinner. Think of the words that are used in education. Outcomes, results, performance, competencies, purpose. Everything is driven towards a certain goal, and the computer breaks it all down into the essential components, what you're going to do the rest of your life, what you're going to become in your community. The whole community is going to be run under the unelected board at whatever education administration that we have, which would be probably the workforce training. But everything will come under that umbrella, and you will be controlled lifelong. Abortion services, leisure, everything you can think of, gardening classes, cooking classes, everything will come under the umbrella of the unelected school district. The fascinating thing is that the educators themselves have written unbelievable numbers of documents on the subject, admitting that is the goal. It is really the Chinese system. And a community educator in the early 70s admitted this. at a conference on community education, which is really all sustainable development, everything now, and regionalism, but admitted it when somebody, a community educator, asked the facilitator, what can you liken the system to that you're putting in, which is what I've been talking about for 1 hour. And he said, well, probably communist China. I really don't like to leave you with that one, but I have to.
China itself is used by the New World Order, Illuminati, whatever you want to call them. That's their model. That's what they want to turn everything into. So, when people wonder what's coming down the pike if we don't do anything, just take a look at China. That's what's coming down the pike.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you look at the sustainable development plans and the housing that they're planning, the stack housing and all, and getting everybody off of the land and into a certain area where they're going to have all their services and restaurants and stores and all, and they're going to completely redesign our communities. And if you're really interested, there's a very interesting book I think it's called The Ideal Communist City. It's on my son's website, and it's written by communists. And if you look at that book, it's the absolute description of what the sustainable UN Agenda 21 people are putting in, wherever they can get away with it. So, support all these great people out there across the country who are fighting like mad. They're fighting sustainable development. Many of them do not really understand that it's communism. They don't understand that. It's important for people to have the courage to use that word. They really did us in on that one, making us think that communism was dead. And for people who want the history on the fact that communism didn't die, they should go buy this on the internet as well. Perestroika Deception by Anatoly Golitsyn, Golitsyn. Perestroika, which means restructuring, right? Perestroika Deception. Now, Golitsyn was high up in the Soviet apparatus for many, many years, and he defected. And what he did over the past 30 years, the book came out about 15 years ago, I guess, and he also had written New Lives for Old. That's another one he wrote. But he provided the Central Intelligence Agency for a good 20 or 30 years with memoranda on how this whole fall of the Soviet Union was planned to be able to move forward into the international socialist system, which was called for by Lenin and Stalin. And he has all these documents are in Perestroika Deception, the memos, the official memos to the CIA, and exactly who was involved, why, when, what. So that's important to remember, because if people in your community look at you, if you use the C word, they get really upset, because communism is supposed to be dead, but it's not. And it's important for you to know about that book, so you just go ahead and tell people this is what they're doing. This is what they're putting in. I mean, look at what's happened since 9/11, the freedoms that we've already lost. I mean, I don't have to tell your listeners that, right? So we've lost so many, and we're moving very quickly into this new international communist system. And that book, if you order it, Perestroika Deception, will give you the proof to show your neighbor. It never died. The word has got to get out. Communism will never die. It is something that has been around for a long time, and it will never die, because its goal is the destruction of religion, basically, and the setting up of a totalitarian system where you will not be allowed to believe in God or go to church or anything. So it will be around forever. That system is not going to die. And we were very foolish to ever believe that it would. We just have to work day in and day out to keep our own free representative form of government alive. And for heaven's sake, don't let innocent-sounding charter schools with their unelected boards be approved, because that'll be the beginning of the unraveling of our representative form of government. And, if one of the largest sectors of our economy, education, can be run by unelected boards consisting of corporations and government people, that's the beginning of the end of freedom. We will no longer be allowed to vote for selectmen, councilmen, whatever, maybe even state legislature. Maybe they will all become appointed as well. And this is no exaggeration, because I have there is an interesting document on my son's website, and it's called, you really go look at this because it's shocking. It's shocking in what it shows how the neoconservatives have planned a privatization for this country, taking over of all of the units that have been many well run, like our school systems. I'm not talking about the dumbing down that took place because of the change agent, but the way it was set up with elected officials, the way our government is set up is very good. We don't want everything privatized. If everything's privatized, it gets into the hands of the corporations. And if we haven't learned something the last few years, do you think they care about you? Pure capitalism cares about you. These corporations are not pure capitalism. They're corporate fascists. That's what they are. And they don't care about you. And what's going to happen is, if we let, through the school agenda, if we allow our schools to be run by unelected boards, that'll be the beginning of our having unelected boards in every element of our lives. And you will have nobody to go to complain about. And you will not be able to remove any of those people from office. So you may think it's a big stretch that I'm making when I talk about getting charter schools approved all over the country, and that's what's happening right now. You may think it's a stretch from there to losing all of our elected officials. It's not. And go and look on my son's website, AmericanDeception.com, at a very lengthy memo that I wrote to Phyllis Schlafly, who's the head of Eagle Forum, good friend of mine, and done a lot of good work, but she certainly doesn't understand the dangers of school choice. I wrote it to her 15 years ago. It's very extensive, and there are lots of attachments to it. So don't just read my letter and not go all the way through to the end of all the attachments. Because what you're going to see is leading conservatives promoting privatization and school choice, school to work, and really the end of our representative form of government. Can you believe it? That's in that document. It's Iserbyt, my name, ISERBYT, dash Schlafly, SCHLAFLY. And it's a letter I wrote to Phyllis in the mid-'90s, warning her and asking her to please support her Eagles out in the state of Washington who were fighting charter schools back then. And I explained why she had to support. She didn't. And she's on this school choice agenda, this bandwagon. Now, I know there are people there who are saying, well, what's the solution? I told you what the solution is. It's homeschooling. I'm not saying that the public schools, obviously, I'm not going to write a 750-page documented book about how the public schools have been deliberately destroyed by the Carnegie Corporation, et cetera, and the NEA at the top, not the teachers at all. I'm not going to do that and then tell you that I think the public schools are great. They're not. But either we do the homeschool solution that I mentioned, or we all get on board and we make sure the U.S. Department of Education and any entity that keeps computerized records or data collection or assessment on our children is abolished, not in Washington. We try to bring our schools back to the system that we had before, which was excellent. I mean, we had an absolutely superb school system, and if you wonder about that, another little item for you to look at on my son's website, just type this in. The name is Hignite. That's the last name of a student in 1953, I believe, in Central California Public School, who took a test on the Constitution. His name was Kenny Hignite. My son tells me that one document gets more hits from all over the world than anything else. It's about a 10-page test. Kenny Hignite got 99 on it. And someone gave me a copy of it when I was speaking in California. They said, I thought you might like to look at this. And I did, and I thought, oh, how is this possible? That our education system, between 1953 and it was 1983 when I got it, that document, has gone totally down the drain. If you want to see what happened in the short 30 years due to these termites, communists in our government, in Congress, in the schools, and in the universities, if you want to see what happened, just look at that test. I couldn't possibly pass it. He had to name all the Supreme Court justices. He had to name the three branches of government. He had to bring the U.S. Constitution, what the federal government was allowed to do, what it wasn't allowed to do, the Bill of Rights, verbatim, everything he had to do. He got 99. That's why what I say is we had the greatest system of education. It was absolutely superb. Up until 1965. You see, that was 1953 that Hignite was in there. He was in ninth grade, I think. And then in 1965, they made their plans for the mental health people to take over the whole education system, to make it performance-based, which is what they're doing, with Skinner. That's performance-based. To judge teachers like they want to do according to performance of the students on the test score. Terrible way to judge a teacher. I mean, that means the teacher has to teach to whatever rotten test the federal government has. So anyway, all of this, that Kenny Hignite test really is good, because you'll be able to, when people look at you with that blank stare and say, well, what do you think we ought to have? I mean, what kind of school system do you think we should have? I mean, this looks pretty good to me. And you say, well, hey, look, take a look. Print this document out. It's only 10 pages. Print it out and say, this is what it used to be. Why isn't your ninth grader being asked these questions about the United States Constitution and our form of government, etc.? I mean, even you, did you ever learn that in school? I hate to admit it here, Popeye. I'm pretty elderly, but I didn't get enough of it either.
No, they didn't go over the Constitution at all, barely at all. And I actually, when I was in school, it was when they were doing this real hardcore transition. I graduated in the early 90s, and I remember exactly what you're talking about that, the testing for, what you were going to be when you got older. Basically, they made you take a test, and in the test, when they were done, they would be like, well, you're going to be this. They told me I was going to be a garbage man. And I laughed at them because I said, well, New York City sanitation, because I lived in Jersey at the time. And I said, well, New York sanitation starts off at like 50, 60 grand a year with full benefits. I said, I'll go sling garbage for that. I said, I make more than you do as a guidance counselor. And they threw me out of the guidance office.
Oh, I'll bet. Boy, you're too smart for them. But there are a lot of Americans around, really, more than you think. And I think we've got to understand the most important thing probably that I've said, if you forget everything else, is that the Carnegie paper, that you look at that, you see that that's the goal. Then you realize that both parties are in bed. I mean, how can you have Arne Duncan, the Heritage Foundation, all the different American Conservative Union, all the different National Review, they're all in bed together, and the Christian churches, and then the Council on Foreign Relations, they're all agreeing on this agenda that I've spent at least an hour talking about, right? And when you recognize that and you understand what the agenda is, which I hopefully have taken you through, sort of the betrayal, then you are able to go out. It's like, as I said before, we're at war. When you're at war, you need, first of all, know who the enemy is. Well, we've determined who the enemy is, right? It's not just the Democrats. Okay. You have to know who the enemy is, and you also have to have ammunition. And the ammunition is my book, other people's books, the Internet, fantastic, if you know what to plug in to find out. If you still have a mind of your own, if you understand the semantics I was talking about, if you understand a lot of the seven-pronged fork stuff. But the ammunition we never had ammunition like this when I was starting to do research in the early 70s. I come back from abroad over 20 years, and I find that I'm being trained to identify the resistors in my community because some good teacher liked what I was doing on the school board and called me and said, listen, you're great. I want you to go for some training. And I said, in what? And she said, innovations in education. How to become a change agent. I didn't know what it was. And so anyway, I went. And that was when Charlotte, I mean, not everybody has an opportunity to find out what's happening. I sure did. And I was trained to identify the resistors, and I was trained to identify the important groups in the community. The Rotary and the Garden Club and Historical Society, the Chamber of Commerce, all these people, go to them. And impress on you need sex ed, drug ed, bullying ed, death ed. You need all these programs. So you get them on board. Then the other members of the community, knowing they're important, says, oh, well, John, Joe, whatever, Mary, they're on that committee, so it must be good. So we fell for all of it. And when he said, I had the book, I brought it back with me, all of these case studies by real teachers and change agents and members of a community, because sometimes the worst change agents are in your own community. You may wonder sometimes why, there are these citizens standing up and supporting this stuff. It's because they've been through the training too. So we're the enemy. We, Popeye, I am, well, members of your audience are, but we've got to realize that we're the fourth arm, right? We're just plain America. And we want the best for our children. We want the best for our neighbors' children. We want the best for teachers. We want them to be able to teach. No teacher ever goes into teaching unless they love children. Over 40 years, they've been putting these teachers through this horrendous, evil sensitivity training, retraining all the time, telling them that they're wrong if they think it's important for children to be able to read and write and count and know history and read Shakespeare. That's wrong. That's old-fashioned. The poor teachers, they really, the fact that this system did not go down the tubes earlier, I've done enough research now to understand that they really wanted this. They expected to get it in the 70s to get us. Now, that's got to tell you something. Thank you to all the people who came before. Thank you all the Popeyes of the world. Thank you to many of the people in your audience. Thank you to the good teachers who did their own thing behind closed doors. Truly, the more I research, the more I realize that teachers are on the hotbed right now, on the spot. Everybody's picking on them, mad because they don't want to have performance-based teaching, mad at the teachers because they don't want to be judged according to the students' test scores. Everybody's mad at teachers. I'm not. You know what? All I can say is if it hadn't been for a healthy percentage of American teachers up until right now who resisted this, and you saw in my book, Popeye, some of the comments from the major change agent about how to deal with these resisting teachers. If it hadn't been for them, you and I wouldn't even be talking on the phone. It would have been all over by now.
With what you said, even dating back to the 80s, screaming, hey, look what they're going to do. And everybody said, Charlotte, you're insane. That's nice. Just sit back, be quiet. You're crazy. And now, you at least you have I don't want to say pleasure, but you can sit here and say, see, now are you going to take what I had to say seriously? Because now more people are going, wow, this lady was correct. I'm an idiot. I should have paid attention sooner. I knew the school system was screwed up from my personal experience with it as a kid. I saw firsthand how messed up it was. Yeah. But I didn't realize, I always thought it was a unique experience to me and maybe a couple other people I knew until I first saw a video interview that you did years ago, and my jaw hit the floor. And I was like, oh my God, I went through everything that they're talking about here. I experienced that myself, which led me to do the research myself. And you're on point when you say communism, because, and I always try to educate people, communism itself is kind of almost like a red herring, the word. And people go, well, what do you mean? And I say, well, communism really isn't communism. It's Illuminism. Yeah. This is Adam Weishaupt's writings rewritten.
Right. Oh, yeah. It's absolutely the Illuminati. I mean, it's Weishaupt and, Karl Marx, and I guess, Karl Marx copied work from Weishaupt. I mean, and then you've got the secret societies, and my father and grandfather were involved in the order at Yale, and I'm not proud of it, but my father was not really involved in anything active from it. They're about 20% of the class at the Order of Skull and Bones is involved deeply in education and foreign policy, etc. But my dad wasn't. 80% aren't. They were members of the order. There were 15 of them each class has. But so I know exactly what there has been a concerted evil effort. I call it the Devil's Seven-Pronged Fork. I really do hope people will go and read that, because this will help you understand too that you're not having done anything. It'll make you feel better. You won't feel as guilty, because it is a diabolical, exquisite plan. And I truly believe that no human mind could have devised this gradual plan with these prongs that I've mentioned. I could put it all together, right? I don't know how any of us really could have escaped it. I was lucky because I kept being plopped in places where I could see this, right? Like, why on earth I ended up in the U.S. Department of Ed, able to see all those papers. That's the hand of God, really. And the hand of God was, my being trained as a change agent. These are very unusual things that happened to me why? I didn't ask for that. I never had planned on writing a 700-page book on education. That was the last thing on earth I had on my mind. I like to play tennis. I used to play a lot of tennis. In fact, did anybody watch last night when poor old Nadal got defeated? But anyway, I'd rather do those things. I'd rather cook. I like to paint. But I've never really had time, Popeye, to do any of these things because I found out when I was trained to be a change agent that I was going to have to identify resistors.
And you were one of the resistors that you were going to have to identify. You were being trained
to identify myself.
Yeah.
This guy is training me to identify myself. Be a good movie, huh?
Actually, it would make an excellent movie. And I got to tell you, they really did create a change agent, just not the change they wanted. Because you really do make a difference, Charlotte. I don't know if you realize how many people that you've woken up with just, the giving out the free PDF copy of your book. I know that thousands of people, at the very least, thousands, and I know it's more than that, have downloaded the free PDF copy of it and read it on their phones or the ebook readers or whatever.
That's good to know.
You've made a huge change. Even if you don't realize the effect you've had, you really have. You took the works of, you helped, you gave Anthony Sutton a lot of the information that he came out with. But, you broke that stuff. But not only did you do that, but through your continued stuff up to this day, you've given people like me, Alex Jones, and others the ability to go ahead and fight this and try to stop this. If we didn't have you, we wouldn't have the ammo we have. We wouldn't have a lot of the info we have. You really put your butt on the line to get us this info, and I do want to give credit where credit is due. You really, in the beginning, when I called you a legend, in my eyes you are. You have really done a lot to turn the tide and put out that, that beacon of good energy and that, that white light. So I want to give you a big thank you, Charlotte.
Well, boy, I certainly appreciate that. It's sort of like, when you fall into these positions like I did, and, what do? You have to do what you have to do. And as I said earlier, all of us are, I think most of us who believe, are religious and truly believe that there is something out there other than the government, right, that is more important than any one of us or any government. And we have to do what's right. If you're looking at children going into a system like this, that first of all, the first thing I saw was it wasn't academic really in the beginning. They were changing it in the early 70s. That bothered me because I thought that was cheating the children, right? And then when I started seeing them abusing them with these dreadful, sick programs, well, actually you don't even have to be religious to know that that is wrong. But if you have any belief in the good Lord, you know that it is your duty. It is your duty to try to stop this stuff. And I think many of your listeners understand exactly what I'm talking about. And we have, nothing's easy in life. Nothing's free. Freedom is not free. And that, of course, is what, unfortunately, I think a lot of Americans had the idea that they didn't really have to do anything to hold on to their freedom. Well, there are great quotes out there. People far better educated than I who know all those great quotes from the Founding Fathers, right, about freedom. It's the least free thing that ever existed. You have to fight to keep it. And I think, I tried to do my little part there, but there are many, and I would like to sort of close with this because, and I've been doing this a lot lately, if it weren't for the great Americans that came before me and you and all your listeners, and I know a lot of them, and I've dedicated my book to a lot of them, they fought the good fight, and boy, they went up against nasty people, and there were some very unfortunate situations that happened that only brave people would march into, and they provided a great deal of research for all of us, and many of them were very active, sort of between after World War II, the UN. These Americans jumped on board then, started doing the research, knew what they were looking at, knew that we were up against communism. Nothing, that was the most important thing of all. We won the war, but we really lost it. Huh? And they knew that. And they provided so much fantastic research, and they testified before Congress, and actually the conclusions and the transcript of the Reese Committee, investigation of the tax-exempt foundations, which my son has up on his website. It's just extraordinary, the testimony of wonderful, normal, average Americans who understood how dangerous the United Nations was, what it really was. Most Americans just don't know that anymore. They've really downplayed that. The UN, you never hear about the horrible things the UN has done.
Interesting note about the UN building in New York. The land was donated by the Rockefellers, and on the land previously was a slaughterhouse. Nice energy for the UN, huh?
I didn't know that. As I said earlier, I have the list of communists who were members of the various agencies within UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, Cultural Organization. They're all communists. Now, if that doesn't tell the average American parent something, because the curriculum comes from the UN, I can assure you of that. In my office, that was all my office in the Department of Ed. So we have a communist education system. That's what they've done. And now, if you watch out for what's happening in your own state, they're putting in the RISC program. It's called Reinventing School Coalition. Very important. I've written about it in my book, in the update to the book. This little bit of information about the new program. It's all for school to work. It calls for getting rid of grades, no ABCD, getting rid of K through 12. The student can graduate at 14 or 21. See, this is workforce training, see? Some are going to get out earlier, some, They're all individual education plans that follows their attitudes, values, beliefs, and skills. The one pilot school up in Alaska that put this in, and it's going into Maine now, all over. That school received the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award, which is usually given to corporations like Cadillac. Now, folks, think. Is this what you want for your children? That's what charter schools are all about.
I have a lot of friends who actually homeschool their kids, and it's like real homeschool. They don't fall for the charter schools. They go for I guess like a little homeschooling coalition thing, and all the parents actually get involved and do things. Like sometimes, my one friend, I think he teaches. I think he does like physical, like PT stuff, like gym class and stuff like that with them, which is good because they don't teach that anymore. When I was a kid, we had auto shop, metal shop, wood shop,
that
music,
was vocational ed.
Yep, all that's gone. It's all gone.
I know. That was a terrific program, and I think a lot of Americans don't realize that what they're putting in now with school to work, that's not vocational ed. Vocational ed was a wonderful voluntary program. And awfully good. My son, the one who has the website, Sam just loved vocational ed. He made beautiful things for me. But anyway, I hope people will buy the little book, because I was just thinking about what is so important. And it is important that they see that Reinventing Schools Coalition information, which is in the update of the book. So all you have to do is go to Amazon and do pick up that book.
I actually urge everybody to do your deal on your website while it's available first, because I know it sounds expensive, but if you can afford it, it's worth it. And let me tell you something, it's worth it. It's worth it. It's worth it. It's the best money you can buy. You're getting 2 books, or best thing you could buy with your money, I should say. You are getting 2 books. You're not only getting the abridged version she's giving to you for free, she's going to give you the full out-of-print phone book size version of her book. She's going to sign it. You get 2 books and shipping for $160. I mean, you can't beat that. And I also urge you to go to her son's site, American Deception, and it's AmericanDeception.com, and go to the site, and when you go there, you'll see they have a little donor thing. If you donate over $25, $25 or more, like 25 is a year access, and then 50 is 5 years, and either way, you can download the entire content of the website, everything. Okay, I urge you to do that while the internet is still available, because Charlotte has sat here with me, and while during the interview she's rattled off 10 different things, if not more, off of American Deception alone that you need to go investigate, and it's going to take time too. And I wouldn't wait. I mean, the website's up there for right now, and that the donations help it keep running. But the reason they're giving you the content to download is because they see what's going on. So it's important, I think, that, $25 for the entire content of the site, and this stuff is historical, going back over 100 years.
Yeah.
You couldn't get this anywhere for, you would pay thousands upon thousands of dollars if you tried to get this anywhere else. So I urge you, just go to AmericanDeception.com, help them out, $25. You can download the entire site, and you'll be able to know that you're helping Charlotte continue to get this information out to people. This is really key, at least in my opinion. So please, go to AmericanDeception.com, and I'm going to go myself and do it. So I urge you to go do it. I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't ask anybody to do anything I'm not going to do myself. So. Well, I really appreciate that plug, and I hope people will do that, because... And, if they can't afford to do it right now, what you can do is you can go in there, and about 75% of the documents are free. You can read them for free, but you're going to see some of the new documents, et cetera, that my son has put donor access only. And, that's where you would join and get, either a 1 year or a 5 year subscription. But there's so much else that's free. And if you can't afford to pay the $25, I know a lot of people are really hard up now, do take advantage of all of the entries that are free. Like 75% of the website is free. Well, thank you for giving away, as much as you do for free, Charlotte, including, again, an ebook copy of the book. So I'm going to push you to go, if you can, do it. And it's a good investment, because look at all the information you're going to get. And then you could sit there and print it out if you wanted to, because it's going to be in PDF form. If you really wanted to spend the money, or if you knew someone that works at like a copy center or something, or you work in an office with a big copier, you can put that thing on a thumb drive, and you could print it all out, and you could have it in physical form. So there you go. You have a physical backup of the entire website of 100-year history of this, over 100 years of what's been going on. It's incredible the amount of information you guys have put together. Well, as I said, it's these wonderful people that came before who provided so much information to us, and a lot of government officials as well have been very helpful to me in my deliberate dumbing down. After I was retired, they would send me. These are career officers in the Department of Ed who would send me some really yummy stuff out of UNESCO and the Office of Economic Cooperation and Development. These are American educators, career guys in the U.S. Department of Ed. And, so there are a lot of wonderful Americans out there who have
have done their best, and as I said, had it not been for these people, who some of whom have died, 20, 30, 40 years ago even, this country would have been gone. In fact, years ago, I was talking to a young man the other day, he's probably around your age, about this, and I said, if it hadn't been for these great Americans, many of whom are mentioned in my book, who work so hard day and night trying to expose this, and they really slowed it down. And you and I wouldn't be talking. And I said, young people who were in their 30s would have lived in a totalitarian country. And this young man said, well, I'm 35. He said, I never would have known freedom, would I? I said, no, you wouldn't have, if it hadn't been for these great Americans that came earlier on, long before I was, even before I was born. But later, it was really mostly the great Americans that did so much, and so much testimony is in my book or in the Congress, with the hearings, that so much of it was after World War II, when the termites really started getting busy. And that was HIS and the UN, and I can't overemphasize enough the role of the Communist United Nations, which still is active and has got our military now as its UN peace force.
Yep. It's a good book about that, Charlotte, to help back up Charlotte's point, is Gary Allen's None Dare Call It Conspiracy.
Oh, yeah, marvelous book. Mm-hmm.
That book itself is like a key. If you read that, and it's a tiny little book, you read that book first, and then you read Charlotte's book. Charlotte's book will actually make a lot more sense if you read Gary Allen's book with it, it's like a key unlocking a huge treasure chest. The treasure chest is Charlotte's book, and Gary Allen's book kind of lays it out in a quick, succinct little, fast nutshell, so you can kind of understand it. And then he gives you resources and tells you where to go get further information on this. Then go read Charlotte's book, and you'll see that everything he talked about 50 years ago is happening today.
He was a great American, and let me point this out. I was a real dodo. It was Gary Allen that educated me. In the 70s, when I ran into the mess on the school board, and I wondered what they're doing with regionalism and all this, and a woman called me because I was writing letters. You see, these people, like the teacher, the retired teacher called, and she paid for me to go to be trained as a change agent. This is another woman who called, and she said, I really love the articles you're writing in the paper, but she said, I wonder if you really understand where all of this is coming from. And I said, well, I don't really know. And she said, well, look, can I come down and have lunch with you at your house? I'm going to bring you a book. And so I said, sure, thank you, good, come. And she came, and she gave me Gary Allen's book. And I opened it up, and I started reading it, and I thought, no. Because of my father and grandfather, being in the order at Yale and Wall Street and all that, and I saw these names of people I knew, and I thought, what is this? And then I turned to my husband, who is Belgian, very highly educated Belgian, and I said, look at this. Do you know anything about this? About Wall Street funding the Bolshevik Revolution, and all this about the Federal Reserve, and the left and the right, and the phony this and that, and he looked at it and he said, well, yeah. He said, don't you? And I looked at him and I said, no, I didn't know this. I did not know this. So I read it. So you're right. That is probably, if someone asked me for the primer to get them going, and the problem is it's $100, I think, or more at Amazon to get it, but I have one, and I've given it to my son to put on at American Deception.
And I have a book copy of it if anyone wants to, they can email me. Just email me at contactdtrh@yahoo.com, contactdtrh@yahoo.com, and just put in the subject line, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, and I'll send you the ebook copy I have of it.
Terrific.
My father got me a copy of it he found on the internet years ago, and it's one of my, it's one of those few books I have, along with yours, that are, it's very important to have, at least in my opinion.
Will you send me the PDF you've got?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Yeah, because I've got to get Sam to put it up, And but as long as you've got it, that's fantastic. I'm glad to know that. So I can send it all over the place.
I can send you a ton of stuff.
Okay, listen, that's great. And Papa, I got to go. My voice is going to go, including the battery on the telephone is going
Charlotte,
to go.
you've gone above and beyond the call of duty. You've gone way over an hour with me. I thank you so much. Thank you for all the work you do, and thank you for taking the time to hang out with me today.
I enjoyed it, and I wish your audience well, and I want them to realize that they are the fourth. Well, 1, 2, 3. They're the fourth form of government, right? You've got the neocon Trotskyites, you've got the left-wing Obama education guy, you've got the Council on Foreign Relations, and we've got you, Americans, who are the majority. You've got to take a stand against these three entities. God bless.
Thank you for coming on, Charlotte. I appreciate it. It was an honor.
Well, thank you, Popeye, for all your work, and your audience is lucky to have you. And we'll stay in touch.
There she goes, ladies and gentlemen, Charlotte Thompson Iserby. A remarkable lady indeed. Make sure you check her websites out, DeliberateDumbingDown.com and AmericanDeception.com. Check her book out, and definitely I would go and pay the $25 for her son's website and rip everything, because that is a archive, just a massive archive of stuff, and it's not going to be up there forever, ladies and gentlemen. So, time is of the essence, especially in this case. Thanks for listening today. Thanks for sharing your 4th of July with me. I couldn't think of any better way to spend the 4th of July than hanging out with Charlotte Thompson Iserby and discussing the dumbing down that's been going on in this country. Now you all know, and like G.I. Joe used to say when I was a kid, knowing is half the battle. So now it's up to you what you do with that knowledge and that information. Thank you for tuning in tonight. I'll see you all again Friday. I love you all. I'm out.